Would protecting a stranger cost you everything you've built? Tell me in the comments what you would have done, but first, listen to this. I was sitting on the edge of my own sofa, hands clasped between my knees, staring at a woman I had never met. She was curled up in a pale blue silk dress, blonde hair fanned across the pillow, breathing slow and even. My apartment smelled like red wine and jasmine perfume, two things that had no business being in my living room at midnight. She had been too drunk to remember her own address, so I brought her here, to the only place I knew was safe. On the coffee table, her clutch sat half open, phone screen glowing in the dark. I wasn't trying to look, but the name on the screen was too bright to miss. Dad, Lawrence Harrington. The CEO of the company I had joined 9 weeks ago. The man who signed off on whether I kept my job or lost it. And down the hall, in the second bedroom, my 7-year-old son was asleep with a nightlight on, 3 walls away from a situation I could not begin to explain. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the rest of it. My name is Isaiah Grant. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a structural engineer at Harrington Development Group, one of the largest real estate firms in Chicago. I grew up outside Indianapolis, in a small town where everyone knew your parents before they knew you. My father was an electrician who came home every evening smelling like copper wire and machine oil. My mother kept the house running on a nurse's salary and a preacher's discipline. They raised me on a philosophy so simple, it fit on a bumper sticker. Show up. Do the work. Never make a scene. I carried that into everything I touched. Into my career. Into the marriage that ended 3 years before this night. Into the way I raised my son after it did. His name is Jordan. He's 7. He has my stubbornness and his mother's laugh. And he is, without any competition, the most important thing I have ever been responsible for. His mother, Monique, and I split when he was 4. It wasn't a war. There were no thrown plates, no screaming matches, just 2 people who sat across a kitchen table one night and admitted they had become strangers wearing wedding rings. She moved 40 minutes south to be near her sister. We shared custody on a schedule held together with careful text messages and mutual restraint. That balance was fragile. I knew it was fragile. Every decision I made with one eye on that balance, because I understood something in my bones that a lot of men learn too late. A black father does not get the benefit of the doubt. Not from a judge, not from a school, not from a stranger with a phone. One bad look, one wrong headline, one situation that could be spun the wrong way. And the life I had built for my son could come apart at the seams. That Friday, Jordan was at a sleepover 2 doors down, and for the first time in months, I had a night to myself. Lawrence Harrington ran his company the way a surgeon runs an operating room. Precise, exacting, zero tolerance for anyone who couldn't keep pace. He was famous in the industry for firing people mid-sentence if he caught the faintest whiff of incompetence. I had been there 9 weeks and was still deep in my probation period, still proving every single morning that I deserved the desk they'd given me. I kept my head down. I did my calculations twice. I made no scene, exactly the way my father taught me. The only person on my team who talked to me like a human being was Deshaun, another engineer who'd been there 3 years. Deshaun was loud where I was quiet. He'd made it his personal mission to drag me out of my apartment at least once a week because, in his words, I was turning into a piece of furniture that pays rent. "You've got a night with no kid," he said that Friday, leaning on my cubicle wall. "You know what a man does with a night like that? He leaves the house. Come on, Grant, one drink. Turn off dad mode for 2 hours before you forget how." I told him I was tired. He told me I was always tired, and that was exactly the problem. So I went. The bar was a rooftop place in River North, packed wall to wall, music thumping up through the floor, string lights swaying in the breeze off the lake. I nursed an IPA in a corner near the railing, already planning my exit route. This wasn't my scene. It never had been. I was doing the math on how long I had to stay before I could leave without hearing about it Monday. Then I saw her. far end of the bar. Alone, blonde hair coming loose from whatever style it had started the night as. A pale blue silk dress that belonged at a gala, not a rooftop full of people in jeans. She was holding what looked like her fourth or fifth cocktail, and her eyes were red around the rims. The specific red of someone who has been crying and drinking in whatever order made the pain quieter. The bartender caught my eye and tilted his head toward her. The universal bartender signal. "Is she with you?" I shook my head. She wasn't with me. She wasn't with anyone. And that was exactly the problem. Because I'd watched 3 different men drift toward her in the last 10 minutes and drift away only because she was still upright enough to wave them off. She wasn't going to be upright much longer. I don't know what made me walk over. My father's voice, maybe, or my mother's. I just knew I couldn't stand at that railing and watch what was about to happen to someone who couldn't stop it. She looked up at me with glassy eyes as I approached. "I didn't ask for a babysitter," she said. "I'm not applying for the job," I told her. She almost smiled at that. Then she tried to stand, and her heel caught the leg of the stool, and she pitched sideways. I caught her elbow before she hit the floor. She weighed almost nothing in that moment. All the coordination drained out of her. "Where do you live?" I asked. "I'll get you a car." She shook her head, words sliding into each other. Something about a high floor, a doorman, but no street, no building name, nothing I could type into an app. She couldn't tell me where home was. She just kept saying she needed to go somewhere safe. Somewhere safe. Like it was the only phrase she had left. So there I was, standing in a parking lot under a buzzing streetlight, holding up a drunk stranger who couldn't remember her own address. And I had exactly 2 choices: call a car and send her off alone into the night to an address she couldn't name, or take her to the only safe place within reach. My apartment, 3 miles away. I chose the second option, and I hated myself the instant I did. Not because it was wrong, because I knew exactly how it would look. I could see the whole thing from the outside, the way a prosecutor would frame it, the way a stranger with a phone would caption it. A black man leading a barely conscious white woman into his apartment at midnight. I knew that image. I had spent 34 years knowing that image. It could end my job. It could reach Monique. It could put a crack in the custody arrangement that no amount of truth would ever fully seal. But I couldn't put her in a car alone. I just couldn't. So I helped her into my passenger seat, buckled her belt because she couldn't manage it, and drove back to Lincoln Park in silence, her head against the window, her breath fogging the glass. And now here I was, on the edge of my own sofa, staring at her phone. Dad, Lawrence Harrington. My stomach dropped straight through the floor and kept going. The woman I had just carried into my home was the daughter of the man who held my entire career in his hands, and she was asleep on my second-hand sofa, and my son was asleep down the hall, and every rational thought in my head was screaming the same thing. This is the beginning of something very bad. I stood in my living room for a long time, just looking at that glowing name until the screen went dark on its own. Then I made a decision, because standing there wasn't one. I got a bottle of water from the kitchen and set it on the coffee table, 2 Advil beside it. I found the softest blanket I owned and draped it over her shoulders. And then I tore a page from the notebook I kept by the door and wrote 5 lines, printing each word carefully so there could be no confusion about any of it. "You're safe. This is my apartment. My son is asleep in the next room. I'm on the floor of my bedroom. Isaiah." I left the note where she'd see it the second she opened her eyes, right next to the water and the pills. Then I went into my own bedroom, closed the door, pulled a blanket off the bed, and lay down on the hardwood floor. I did not take the bed while a stranger slept in my living room, because that felt like a thing I'd have to defend later, even to myself. I lay on that floor and stared at the ceiling and listened to the building settle around me, and I did not fall asleep until sometime after 3 in the morning. I woke before she did. My back was a solid sheet of pain from the floorboards. For one blank second I didn't remember why I was down there, and then all of it came flooding back at once. I got up, cracked my spine back into something like alignment, and went to check on Jordan first out of pure habit before I remembered he was 2 doors down at the Palmers. Right. He wouldn't be back until 9. Small mercy. Whatever happened in the next hour, at least it wouldn't happen in front of him. I made coffee. A few minutes later, I heard the sofa creak in the other room. Then slow footsteps. Then a long silence, which meant she'd found the note. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding that torn piece of paper. Hair tangled, mascara smudged into gray shadows under her eyes, one strap of her dress slipping off her shoulder. She looked like a woman trying to reassemble the last 12 hours out of scattered, water-damaged pieces. "Isaiah," she said, reading it off the note. I nodded. "You brought me to your apartment." "You couldn't remember your address," I said. I kept my voice flat and even, the way you'd talk to someone standing on a ledge. "You kept asking me to take you somewhere safe. This was the only place I had. I slept on the floor in there. Nothing happened. Nothing was ever going to happen." She was quiet for what felt like a full minute, her eyes moving from me, to the blanket folded on the sofa, to the untouched glass of water, doing the same math I'd done the night before, but running it in the opposite direction. "Most guys," she said slowly, "would have just left me at the bar." I shrugged. "Most guys aren't me." It wasn't a boast. It was just the plain truth, said the way my father taught me the truth should be said. Without decoration. Without asking for anything back. That's when I heard the front door. Not a knock. A key. The Palmers had a spare, and Jordan had his own way of announcing himself, which was to not announce himself at all. The lock turned and the door swung open, and my son walked into his own home to find a strange woman in a wrinkled evening gown standing in the kitchen doorway. He stopped dead. His backpack slid off one shoulder. And he looked at her, then at me, then back at her, with an expression that was not the wide-eyed wonder people expect from a kid. It was caution. Real, wary, 7-year-old caution, the kind children have when the shape of their world has shifted half an inch and they haven't decided yet whether that's dangerous. "Who is she?" Jordan asked. Not rude, just careful. His eyes stayed on her. And there it was, the one question in the world I could not lie my way around, because my son had been raised, above everything else, to expect the truth from me. That was the whole deal between us. That was the thing I'd promised him the day his mother moved out. I don't lie to you, buddy. Not ever. Even when it's hard. I crouched down to his level, the way I always did when something mattered. "Her name's a mystery to me too, honestly," I said. "She needed help last night and didn't have anywhere safe to go. So I let her rest on the couch. I slept in my room. She's leaving soon. You did the right thing being careful. You always check, okay? You always check." Jordan studied me for a long moment with those serious eyes, weighing my words against whatever his gut was telling him. Then he gave a small nod, some internal jury reaching a verdict, and walked past both of us to get a juice box out of the fridge like it was any other Saturday. When I looked up, the woman was watching the whole thing with an expression I couldn't read. Something had moved across her face while I talked to my son. Something she wasn't ready to name. She called a car a few minutes later, gathered her clutch off the coffee table. At the door she paused, and for a second I thought she might tell me her name, or leave a number, or say something that turned this from a bizarre one-off into a beginning. She didn't. She just said, "Thank you, for being decent." And then she was gone, down the stairs and into the back of a sedan. And I stood at the window and watched the car pull away and figured that was the end of it. A strange night. A story I'd never tell anyone. Done. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about almost all of it. Monday morning, Deshaun nudged me in the hallway outside the engineering bay. "Boss's daughter's in the building today," he said, nodding down the glass corridor toward the executive side. "Heads up. When Harrington's kid is around, everybody pretends to work harder." I looked through the partition. And there she was. Camille Harrington. Blazer buttoned. Blonde hair pulled back into a bun so clean it looked engineered, posture like a plumb line, heels clicking across the polished concrete with the certainty of someone who owned the floor she walked on. She was a completely different person from the woman who had fallen off a bar stool into my arms 2 nights before. Put together. Untouchable corporate royalty. Her eyes swept the engineering floor. Passed over the drafting tables, the other engineers, the whole open plan of it. And then they landed on me. Just for one beat. One single beat. Then she looked away and kept walking, her expression not moving a fraction of an inch. She'd recognized me. I was certain of it. And I had watched, in real time, the exact moment she decided not to let it show. Down the hall, a door closed behind her. And I stood at my desk with my coffee going cold in my hand, understanding with total clarity that the strange night I'd filed away as over was not over at all. It hadn't even started. Over the next few weeks, Camille started showing up at the office more than any marketing director needed to. The official reason was airtight. She was running the campaign for a new lakefront tower the company was breaking ground on, a 42-story residential build that was the biggest project in the firm's pipeline. She had meetings. She had presentations. She had a dozen legitimate reasons to be in our building 3 and 4 days a week. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? But I started noticing patterns that the official story didn't cover. She found reasons to come down to the engineering floor. Not the marketing suite upstairs where her actual work lived. The engineering floor. She'd appear at my desk with questions about load-bearing walls and foundation reinforcement and wind shear calculations. Questions specific enough that answering them meant she had to pull up a chair and sit beside me while I walked her through the math. She'd lean in over the drawings, and I'd catch the faint edge of jasmine, and I'd lose my place in a sentence I'd said 100 times. She brought coffee for the whole team one morning, a tray of it. Generous and casual, but she'd only bothered to learn how one person took theirs. Mine, black, no sugar. She set it down in front of me without a word and handed the rest out like an afterthought. She asked Deshawn, never me directly, whether I usually stayed late. She stood at the window one afternoon while I explained a set of structural blueprints to a junior engineer, and when I glanced up mid-sentence. She wasn't looking at the drawings. She was watching my hands move across the paper. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself a lot of things. The trust between us built through small things nobody else would have noticed. I saw that the swivel chair at her desk upstairs wobbled hard every time she shifted her weight, one caster loose in its socket. Nobody else cared. One evening after she'd gone home, I found a hex wrench in the supply closet, got down on my knees under her desk, and tightened every bolt on the base until the thing sat dead level. I didn't mention it. It just felt wrong to watch something broken and walk past it. That's a sickness my father gave me. The next morning there was a yellow sticky note pressed to my keyboard. In handwriting I didn't recognize yet, but would come to know very well. The chair works perfectly now. You fix things. I read it twice and slid it into my desk drawer. I didn't understand yet that she meant something much larger than the chair. But I kept the note. I still have it. One afternoon, Camille came by the apartment. She'd offered to drop off a set of marketing renderings that needed engineering sign-off, which was a paper-thin excuse, and we both knew it. But I let it stand because I wasn't ready to examine why I wanted her to come. Jordan was home. He was at the kitchen table with a worksheet and a fistful of colored pencils, and when Camille stepped inside, he went quiet and still in that same wary way he had the first morning. She smiled at him. "Hi, I'm Camille. What are you working on?" Jordan looked at her. Then he looked at me. Then, in the flat, devastating way that only a 7-year-old can deliver a thing, he said, "Is my mom coming?" The room went silent. He wasn't being cruel. He was being a kid whose family had already come apart once, doing the math on whether this stranger in a nice coat was a threat to the arrangement he'd finally gotten used to. His mom lived 40 minutes away. His mom was still his mom. And here was a woman his father clearly went quiet around, standing in their kitchen like she might be planning to stay. Camille's smile faltered. For once, the composure that never cracked in a boardroom had nothing to hold on to. "No," she said carefully. "I'm just dropping off some work for your dad. I'll be gone in a few minutes." She set the renderings on the counter and she left inside of 5 minutes, and in the doorway she gave me a look that wasn't hurt, exactly. It was something more complicated. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that whatever this was, it came with a child attached, and that child had just made it clear the door was not standing open. After she left, I sat down across from Jordan at the table. "You okay, bud?" He shrugged, coloring hard inside the lines. "Is she your girlfriend?" "No," I said. And then, because I don't lie to him, I don't know what she is. "But you don't have to worry about your mom's spot. Nobody's taking it. You hear me?" "Nobody." He nodded. But I'd seen the thing I needed to see, and it put steel in my spine. The next time Camille found a reason to be alone with me at the office, I said the thing I'd been rehearsing. "Whatever this is," I told her, keeping my voice low, the two of us tucked in the shadow of a supply corridor after hours, "it can't touch my son. I've got a custody situation that's held together with tape and good behavior. I can't have a woman moving through his life and then moving out of it. He's already survived that once. I won't do it to him twice. So if you're not sure, if this is a fun distraction from whatever you're running from, then walk away now, no hard feelings. But leave him out of it." I braced for her to be offended. She wasn't. She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her expression settled, like I'd said the one thing that proved I was worth the risk she was already taking. "Okay," she said quietly. "That's fair." And then, because I'd drawn a line she respected, she told me the truth about herself. We were the only two people left in the building that night. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The office was dim, lit only by desk lamps and the amber glow of the city through the floor-to-ceiling glass. Camille sat on the edge of a desk in an empty conference room, shoes kicked off, bare feet on the carpet, a cup of cold coffee going colder in her hands. And she told me about Tucker Vance. Tucker was the son of her father's most important business partner. Their relationship had been less a romance than a corporate merger with two people standing in for the paperwork. Their fathers golfed together every Saturday. Their families shared holidays, beach houses, box seats. The relationship was expected the way a quarterly report is expected. And for 2 years, Camille had played her part. But Tucker was controlling. Possessive, jealous in the quiet, dangerous way that never leaves a bruise a doctor could photograph but scars everything underneath. He tracked her location on her phone and called it caring. He decided where they ate and who they saw and which of her friends were acceptable. He treated her not as a person, but as an asset he managed. A line item on a spreadsheet he was determined to keep in the black. "The night at the bar," she said, staring at the floor, "was the night I finally ended it. For good." I told him that afternoon it was over. He did not take it with any grace at all. She turned the cold cup in her hands. "I didn't go to that bar to meet anyone. I went because I didn't know where else in the world to go. I wasn't just drunk that night, Isaiah. I was free for the first time in 2 years. And the first person I met, standing in the middle of all that wreckage, was you." I didn't know what to say to that. The weight of it settled into my chest and stayed there. A few days later, Lawrence Harrington called me into his office. The stated reason was the lakefront project. And we did talk about it, for a few minutes, load calculations and timeline. But as I stood to leave, he stopped me with 2 fingers raised off his desk. "I keep my work and my family separate, Grant." He watched me over the top of his reading glasses, and his voice was as level as a poured foundation. "I expect everyone under this roof to do the same." It wasn't a question. It wasn't quite a threat. But it landed like a nail driven clean through wood, and there was no way to misread it. He knew something, or suspected it, and he was giving me one chance to make it disappear on my own. I didn't look toward the marketing wing for the rest of that week. but you can't unknow a person. And walking to the parking garage after a late shift one evening, Camille fell into step beside me. The corridor was empty. Our footsteps echoed off the concrete. "Why did you really bring me to your apartment that night?" she asked. "You could have called me a cab, dropped me at a hotel. Anything? Why you're home? With your son right there?" "Because you asked me to take you somewhere safe," I said. "And a hotel isn't safe when you can't even say your own name to the front desk." My place was the only safe I had. I stopped walking. And I've spent my whole life knowing exactly how that decision could be used against me. I did it anyway. That should tell you something about how it looked to me versus how it actually was. She looked at me for a long time. Longer than you look at a colleague. Longer than was comfortable. "It does," she said quietly. "I didn't sleep well that night. Or the one after it." Then Tucker came back. He walked into the Harrington Group offices on a Tuesday morning under the polished banner of a partnership meeting. Tall, clean-shaven, wearing a suit that cost more than 2 months of my rent. He had that prep school confidence, the kind that comes from never once in your life hearing the word no. The kind that fills a room before the person wearing it even opens his mouth. He shook hands with everyone in sight. He smiled like a man who already owned the building and was being gracious about letting the rest of us stand in it. But the moment he spotted Camille, standing near my desk, reviewing a set of drawings I'd printed for her, that smile dropped off his face for a fraction of a second before it snapped back into place. Nobody else in the room caught it. I did. Tucker hadn't come for business. He'd come to reclaim what he still believed was his. And the weapon he chose wasn't a lie. It was the truth. Surgically stripped of every piece of context that made it decent. It started in Lawrence's office. I was at my desk, close enough to hear every word through the open door. Tucker leaned against the frame with the relaxed posture of a man who had rehearsed his concern in front of a mirror that morning. "Lawrence," he said, pitching his voice just loud enough to carry across the floor, "did you know one of the guys from your engineering team took your daughter back to his apartment in the middle of the night? Drove her there. Walked her inside." He let the words hang in the silence. He didn't add the details. He didn't say she was too drunk to give an address. He didn't mention the water on the table, or the note, or the man who slept on his own floor so a stranger could rest safely with a child in the next room. He didn't need to. Those words, arranged in exactly that order, did all the damage by themselves. The context wasn't lost. It was removed. Deliberately, precisely, the way you'd cut a load-bearing wall out of a building if you wanted it to come down. Lawrence looked up slowly from his desk. His expression didn't change, but I watched his jaw set. Tucker let his gaze drift through the glass wall, straight at me. I sat perfectly still, pen frozen over a set of calculations, my pulse hammering in my ears. Later that same day, Tucker found me alone in the hallway by the break room. And he'd done his homework. He'd somehow gotten security camera footage from my apartment building. 12 seconds of grainy black and white video showing me guiding a stumbling Camille through my front door at 12:15 in the morning. No audio. No context. No note. No water. No 7-year-old asleep behind a nightlight. Just a man and a visibly drunk woman disappearing into an apartment in the middle of the night. "A drunk girl in your place at midnight," Tucker said, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, his voice calm, almost friendly. "You know exactly how that looks, Grant, and so will everybody else once they see it." He tilted his head. "A guy like you. This kind of clip. I don't think I even have to spell out how that plays. A guy like you." He said it lightly. He said it like an observation. And that was the whole knife of it. The friendlier the tone, the harder the threat lands, because it makes the destruction sound like a reasonable weather report instead of an attack. And we both knew what a guy like you meant. It meant a jury of strangers would look at that footage and fill in the worst story on their own. And they'd fill it in faster because of the color of the hand on that woman's back. I didn't respond. My jaw was locked tight enough to feel my molars grinding. My hands were curled at my sides, fingernails pressing half-moons into my palms. But I said nothing, because anything I said would become ammunition. Another sentence he could strip of context and aim like a rifle. I'd already watched him do it to the truth about that night. I was not going to hand him more material to work with. He smiled at my silence like it was a victory, pushed off the wall, and walked away whistling. And standing there in that hallway, I felt the fragile thing at the center of my life start to crack. Because this wasn't just about my job anymore. That footage wouldn't stay in this building. It would go where these things always go. And somewhere 40 minutes south, my son's mother would open a message, and every careful piece of the life I'd built for Jordan would be up for renegotiation in front of a judge who'd take one look at a grainy midnight clip and decide he already understood everything. Everything I'd protected. Everything I'd stayed small and careful and blameless to keep. One 12-second video aimed by a man in a good suit who was bored and wanted his property back. This was the moment it all threatened to come apart. If you want to see what happened next, whether the truth had any chance at all against a lie that looked this convincing, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. Because the next part is the one you won't see coming. Tucker sent the hallway footage to Lawrence that afternoon. Within the hour, I was sitting across from the CEO in his corner office. Lawrence had the clip paused on his laptop, frozen on the exact frame where my hand was on Camille's waist, steadying her through the doorway. He wasn't angry, exactly. He was something harder to sit across from, a father looking at a piece of evidence that confirmed his deepest fear, fighting to hold his judgment long enough to hear the other side. "Explain," he said. One word. So I told him everything. She couldn't remember her address. She kept asking me to take her somewhere safe. I put her on the sofa, set out water and Advil, wrote a note telling her where she was and where I'd be, and slept on the floor of my own bedroom with the door shut and my 7-year-old son asleep down the hall. She left the next morning. Nothing happened. Nothing was ever going to. And I didn't know she was your daughter until her phone lit up with your name after she was already asleep on my couch. Lawrence sat with that for a long time, the kind of silence where you hear the ventilation humming and the traffic 12 floors down. "I'll ask Camille," he said finally. "You should. She'll tell you the same thing. Because it's what happened." But I could see it in his face. The damage was already done. A truth without context isn't really the truth. It's just an accusation wearing a better suit, and Tucker had made sure it walked in wearing the best one in the building. The next morning, Lawrence reassigned me. A renovation project on the south side, 40 minutes out. Nothing to do with the lakefront tower, nothing to do with marketing and the entire point, nothing to do with Camille. It wasn't a firing. Firing me would have needed a reason he could put in writing. This was cleaner. Exile with a parking space. Deshawn found my new desk that afternoon, out in the concrete and dust field office they'd shipped me to. "You got exiled, man," he said quietly. Yeah, there wasn't anything else to say. But the reassignment did something Lawrence didn't intend. It didn't just threaten my standing, it threatened everything under it. A demotion becomes a pay concern, and a pay concern becomes a stability concern, and stability is the exact word a family court uses when it decides which parent a child spends his weeks with. I sat in that field office and ran the arithmetic every decision of my life came back to. If this got worse, if that footage kept spreading, if Monique heard a version of it shaped by anyone but me, I could lose more than a job. I could lose days with my son. The custody balance I'd protected by staying small and blameless my whole adult life could tip. Because I stopped to help a stranger on a Friday night. I didn't sleep. I sat on the sofa where Camille had slept as a stranger and stared at the wall and, for the first time in a long time, let myself feel afraid. But Camille did not take it quietly. She walked into her father's office that same afternoon and closed the door. I wasn't there. But half the floor heard it, not the words. The walls were too thick, but the tone carried. It wasn't pleading. It was anger, Controlled and precise, the voice of a woman who'd spent 2 years being spoken about and arranged like furniture and had finally chosen to speak for herself, at full volume. When she walked out 10 minutes later, her eyes were red but her posture was perfect. Back straight, chin level. A few days later, an interoffice envelope arrived at my field desk. Inside was Camille's clutch, and tucked into it, folded into a careful square, a piece of paper with 5 words in her handwriting. "I'm not losing this one." She wasn't talking about the clutch. And for the first time in weeks, something clenched behind my ribs let go. 2 weeks passed. I didn't see her. She didn't call. I didn't reach out. The line Lawrence had drawn was sharp, and I had a son and a career on my side of it. So I buried myself in the renovation, pouring every hour into concrete specs and load calculations, trying not to think about her. Which meant I thought about her constantly. Every quiet lunch alone. Every evening on the sofa where she'd slept, looking at the cushion that still held, somewhere deep in the fabric, the faintest ghost of jasmine. Then one Thursday evening, the doorbell rang. I was on the couch with a book I'd read the same paragraph of 4 times. Jordan was in his room building something out of blocks. I opened the door, and there she was. No makeup, hair loose, an oversized hoodie that swallowed her whole old jeans. Nothing about her said corporate royalty. She was holding a brown paper bag from the Thai place 3 blocks down. "I figured you eat alone most nights," she said. "I do too." Jordan appeared in the hallway behind me, drawn by the visitor. He remembered her, and I watched him run the same wary calculation as before, but this time she was holding takeout in a hoodie, not standing in his kitchen in a coat like she owned it, and something about that shifted the math. "Is that pad thai?" he asked suspiciously. "It is. And spring rolls. I didn't know if you liked them, so I got extra." He considered this the way a small king considers a peace offering. "I like spring rolls," he admitted. So the 3 of us sat on the living room floor, because the dining table was buried under drawings and binders and an unwashed mug. Jordan showed her, unprompted, which floored me, the block tower he'd been building, and she asked real questions about it, load-bearing questions. "Is that going to hold if you put the big one on top?" And my son looked at her like she might not be a threat after all. He went to bed easier than usual. And then it was just the 2 of us on the floor, 3 feet from the hardwood where I'd slept the night she passed out on that same sofa. She noticed. She looked at the floorboards, then at me. "Is this where you slept?" I nodded. She went still for a while, turning something over. Then she told me she'd gone to her father, sat across his desk and told him everything, holding nothing back. About Tucker, the possessiveness, the tracking, the 2 years performing a relationship she never chose. About the bar, what she was running from and stumbling toward. About me. And Lawrence had listened. Hadn't interrupted. Hadn't redirected it to business. He wasn't happy, not by a long measure, but he'd listened, which was more than she'd expected and more than he'd ever managed when it came to her life. Then she set her chopsticks down and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on her. Open, unguarded, a little afraid. The way a person looks right before they hand you the one thing that could break them if you used it. "I need to tell you something," she said. I stopped eating. That night at the bar. "I knew who you were." I stared at her. "Deshaun pointed you out at a company event a few weeks before. The new guy on his team, too quiet for his own good. I noticed you. Later I looked you up in the directory, found your photo, read your project history. I thought about you more than I should have. And then Deshaun mentioned to someone in Tucker's circle that your group was going out that Friday. I went to that bar because I knew you'd be there, Isaiah. I didn't plan to fall apart. I didn't plan to get so drunk I couldn't remember my address. I didn't plan for you to take me home. But I planned to be in the same room as you. And I'm not going to sit on this floor and pretend that was an accident." I sat there with cold noodles on my lap, looking at the woman who'd just told me the most chaotic night of my recent life had never been random at all. She'd come looking for me. The reason she gave the world, drowning the end of Tucker in cocktails, was true. But underneath it was a second truth she'd carried for months. She'd wanted to be near me. And through a chain of accidents neither of us could have engineered, she'd ended up unconscious on my couch and I'd ended up on the floor, and now here we were in the same room, in the same spots, with the whole truth finally on the carpet between us. "If we do this," I said slowly, "your father could bury my career. And that's not just me. I've got a kid whose whole life depends on me staying steady. You understand what you'd be walking into?" She looked at me without blinking. "If your father ends a man's career for being decent to his daughter and kind to his son, that tells the world a lot more about him than it does about you." I didn't kiss her that night. We washed the dishes side by side at the narrow sink, shoulders close but not quite touching, steam rising, neither of us saying much. She left a little after 11. At the door she turned back with a small, deliberate smile. "I left my clutch on your kitchen counter," she said. "On purpose." Then she went down the stairs, and I stood with my hand on the knob, just breathing, feeling something I hadn't felt since before the divorce. The quiet, terrifying possibility that my life might still hold a direction I hadn't planned for. The first month was careful and private and entirely ours. I cooked. Camille brought wine. She'd arrive after work, slip off her shoes at the door, and curl into the corner of that same second-hand sofa where she'd slept as a stranger, reviewing reports while I spread drawings across the floor with a pencil behind my ear. On the nights Jordan was home, she learned him slowly, at his pace, never pushing. She helped him with a math worksheet one evening and didn't correct the way he did it, just asked questions until he found the answer himself. That was the night he started warming to her for real. She began leaving things at the apartment. One object at a time, each small enough to seem accidental, each placed with enough intention that I knew it wasn't. A toothbrush in the bathroom cup. Soft slippers by the door. A half-finished novel with a grocery receipt for a bookmark. A hair tie on the nightstand. Each one a quiet sentence. "I'm choosing to be here." She never said it out loud. The slippers said it for her. At 3 months, Lawrence invited me to lunch. Just the two of us. A quiet steakhouse downtown. I walked in convinced I was about to be fired somewhere too nice to make a scene. Instead, he ordered a steak medium rare and looked at me across the white tablecloth for a long time before he spoke. "Camille told me everything," he said. "About Tucker. About that night. About the note. About your boy. He went quiet long enough for the waiter to bring bread and vanish. I don't like it." Another pause, heavier than the first. "But I respect that you told me the truth when I asked. Even when it put a target on your back and you knew it would. Most men in your position that day chose the version that protected them. You didn't. That counts with me." He didn't say he accepted us. He didn't offer a blessing or call me son. He said he respected the truth, and standing where I was, inside a relationship that could still cost me the days I had with my child, that single sentence was enough to build on. Tucker made one last attempt around then. He dug up the same footage and emailed it directly to Lawrence, recommending the firm reconsider my employment. Lawrence forwarded the whole thing to me that afternoon. One line in the body. Handled, focus on the building. That was when I understood, with no doubt left, that Lawrence Harrington had chosen where he stood. Not because he liked me. Not because he approved. But because he'd weighed the evidence against the accusation and chosen the harder truth. And because, I think, the detail that moved him wasn't about his daughter at all. It was the part where a man with everything to lose slept on his own floor to keep a stranger safe, with his son down the hall. A man who fixed a wobbling chair no one asked him to fix. Lawrence understood loyalty as a thing you demonstrate when no one's making you. And I demonstrated it, without ever meaning to a woman I didn't know was his. His rigidity, the quality I'd feared most, had swung around and come down on my side. A man that unbending doesn't break when the wind changes. He holds. Even for you. At 6 months, I finished the biggest project of my career, the 42-story tower on the lakefront. 2 years of engineering made permanent in steel and glass and poured concrete. At the ribbon cutting, Lawrence spoke my name into the microphone, and 300 people in hard hats and suits applauded. Camille stood in the crowd beside her father. Jordan was there too, in a collared shirt he'd complained about the whole drive. Holding my hand and staring up at the building his dad helped hold against the sky. And when the noise died down, Camille looked at me with an expression no one else could have read. But I could. I see you. I choose you. I'm not going anywhere. At 1 year, Camille moved in, not to her father's penthouse with the skyline and the doorman and the marble island. To my apartment. The 2-bedroom in Lincoln Park with the creaky floors and the kitchen barely wide enough for 2 people to pass without touching. She arrived on a Saturday morning in early autumn with 3 suitcases and the clutch. I watched her carry the last box up the stairs, and when she set it down, I said, "You're leaving a penthouse for this?" She picked up the clutch, walked to the narrow shelf by the front door, set it there, and straightened it with 2 fingers. "I'm not leaving anything," she said. "I'm arriving." The clutch stayed on that shelf. It wasn't lost. It wasn't forgotten in a conference room or mailed through interoffice with a secret folded inside. It was placed there on purpose by a woman who'd spent years holding everything tightly, guarding herself behind expensive walls and controlled smiles, who had finally found a place ordinary enough and safe enough to set something down and leave it. A few weeks later, there was a parent-teacher conference at Jordan's school. Camille came with me. She'd asked to, and Jordan hadn't objected, which was its own kind of milestone. We sat in the small plastic chairs while his teacher walked us through his reading level and his habit of correcting other kids' block towers. And near the end, the teacher glanced between us and asked Camille warmly, "And are you Jordan's mom?" The table went quiet. Same question, different room, more than a year later. And I watched my son, sitting right there, decide how to answer it. He didn't say yes. His mom was his mom, 40 minutes south, still holding her spot the way I'd promised him no one ever would take. But he didn't shrink from it either. "No," Jordan said, matter of fact, swinging his feet under the chair. "That's Camille. That's Camille. Not my dad's girlfriend. Not a stranger. Not a threat to the arrangement. Just Camille, a fixed point in his world solid enough to have a name and need no explanation." He didn't reject her, and he didn't hand her a title that wasn't hers. He'd done the thing his father tried to do with everything, told the exact truth, no more and no less, and made room in it for her to stand. Camille held her composure through the rest of the meeting, but in the car she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a second before she got her face under control, and I reached over and squeezed her knee, and neither of us said anything. Because the kid had already said it for us. And the sofa, that second-hand beige sofa she'd collapsed onto as a total stranger, too drunk to say her own name, was the same sofa she curled up on every Sunday now, feet in my lap, a novel open on her knees while Jordan sprawled on the floor with his blocks and the city light settled through the window. Same frame. Same worn cushions. Same faint creak when you sat down too fast. Same apartment. Same city. Same man beside her. But everything else in the universe had rearranged itself into a completely different shape. One morning I was flat on my back under the kitchen sink, wrench in hand, fixing a slow leak that had been dripping a week. Camille leaned against the counter and looked down at me. Jordan was at the table behind her, eating cereal. "You still fix things," she said. I tightened the fitting and shrugged. "That's my job." And from the table, without looking up from his cereal, Jordan said, "Dad fixes everything." Camille shook her head slowly, looking down at me, then over at my son, then back. "No," she said. "That's not a job. That's who you are." Sometimes I think about that first night. I sit on this sofa, our sofa now, and go back to the version of me on its edge, hands clasped, staring at a stranger in a pale blue dress, watching her phone light up with a name that could have ended everything I'd spent my life protecting. Every instinct told me to walk away. This is not your problem, Grant. In the morning, pretend it never happened. You have a son. You cannot afford this. But I stayed long enough to set a bottle of water on the table. I stayed long enough to write a note that said she was safe. I stayed long enough to sleep on the floor of my own bedroom so a woman I'd never met could rest without fear, 3 walls from my sleeping child. That small thing, the water, the 2 Advil, the 5 words on a torn piece of paper, is what changed everything. Not because I'm some particularly good man, but because sometimes life doesn't ask you to do anything heroic. It just asks you to stay 1 more minute and let someone know they're not alone. She came into my life disguised as a stranger who needed somewhere safe. I gave her my sofa. She gave me back a whole future I didn't know I'd stopped believing in. And my son, who watched me help a stranger and learned something about the kind of man he wants to be, he got a house with more people in it who show up when it counts. If you've ever stayed when every instinct told you to leave, I want to hear about it. Tell me your story in the comments. And if this one made you feel something, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because I bring you a new story every single week. Have you ever helped a stranger and realized later that they changed your entire life? And if you'd been in my shoes that night, a drunk stranger who couldn't name her own address, and everything you'd built waiting at home, would you have brought her to safety? Or would you have left her at the bar?